So welcome to this month's Legacy Project conversation. My name is Chad Reyes, and one of the co-founders along with Dan Scott. We're excited to have you guys with us today. As many of you know, every month what we're doing is we're continuing a conversation around legacy. And this is something that has been near and dear to my heart. My wife, who's also a business partner with me, many years ago, she came to me, we had watched a movie called The Ultimate Gift. And she said to me, she said, how can we build this into our business model? And you fast forward about 11 years, and we've integrated it into our conversations with the families we work with the advisors we work with. And for those of you that were on our last month's legacy project, you'll know that we discussed about the 4 phases of generational wealth. So today we're going to continue talking about that. And just a little bit of housekeeping. At any point during today, feel free to jump in. You could raise your hand by pressing the raise your hand button. You could type into the chat box, and Danielle will be able to ask your question. Or if you raise your hand, we'll open up your mic and you'll be able to ask your question. The goal is Dan and I don't have every solution, and we don't have the answer to the legacy problem. But what we do know is we've built something, and we've refined stuff over the years that hopefully what I share with you and what he shares with you will allow you to be able to utilize some of that in your practice. And as you can see on the screen, there are 3 different areas to the legacy project. So you have, the first one is community. It's where you can take this, what we're talking about, and bring it to your local community with other advisors in your community, and be able to listen to these videos. They're all on our YouTube channel, and we're encouraging people to just continue the conversation around legacy. I know for me, like I said, I've been at this for about 18 years now, and the first 7 were tough. The last 11 were much better because I had the ability to come around other people of like-mindedness to be able to build a community around legacy. So we're encouraging those that are on here that are advisors, build a local community. Jump in your conference room, play one of these videos, and discuss what it looks like, or do a Zoom meeting and do that. The second is these conversations, these monthly conversations. So today is just continuing with that series on legacy project conversations. And then the last is collaboration. We want to create a community that give other advisors the ability to work together to serve families at a higher level. So those are the 3 C's to the legacy project. I'm going to share with you the next screen. The next screen is our YouTube page. So you can go on our YouTube page and see all of the recordings from all the previous months. And the intention there is, like I said, is so that you can use it as a resource. You can use it where we're not asking for $1 other than we want to get this message of legacy planning out to advisors to be able to serve more families, to be able to make more of an impact with the families that we all get the opportunity to work with. So that leads me to our next part. And I'm going to jump in, and we started this with the conversation last month around the major issues why families have struggles with transferring wealth across generations. So I'm going to show you the statistics right now, and then we can jump into it a little bit further. So one of the statistics is this. Hold on one second. One of them is that 70% of all wealth transfers doesn't make it to the 2nd generation. Now, we know these statistics, and today we're going to talk about going deeper as an advisor, because legacy planning is not just about the infrastructure or the products. It's also about the emotional side of it and how do we handle that. So we're going to talk about that. But the statistics say that 70% of all wealth transfers doesn't make it to the 2nd generation. 90% of it doesn't make it to the 3rd generation. And 97% of it doesn't make it to the 4th generation. Now, I know you may be saying, well, why is that? And we're gonna go into that. The first main one is 60% of it doesn't make it due to breakdown in communication and trust. And if we're talking about legacy planning, and we know that 60% of most wealth transfer plans are due to breakdown in communication and trust, and you and I as advisors that serve these families, how do we address that? Now, hopefully today, some of the things I share with you just give you a couple of resources to be able to tap into. I would encourage you to have someone on your team or someone that you collaborate with to be able to walk through these conversations with families, because a lot of them are the emotional side of it. But as advisors, we need to know that. And 25% of it is due to failure to prepare the next generation. So I'm going to come back to these statistics. 70% doesn't make it to the second generation, 90% doesn't make it to the third, 97% doesn't make it to the fourth. These are the two reasons: breakdown in communication and trust, and failure to prepare the next generation. So that I wanted to give context today as we jump into it. And at any point, if you have a question, I want to be able for us to have that dialogue. So my partner in this project, Dan Scott, he's on the call. He's not on the webcam, so he may interject at any point. And my partner, and my wife and business partner, Danielle Reyes, she's on the call as well and may interject. But if you raise your hand, we'll make sure that we get to you. Or if you type in your chat, we want to address real-time issues with you as advisors serving families around legacy. So if you look to the screen here, last month we had discussed this. So last month we were talking about the 4 phases of generational wealth. So I'm going to give a quick synopsis of it. It's a chassis that we use when we're working with clients so that they can understand where they're at. And then I want to talk about the other part here, this part here, the 60% of breakdown in communication and trust, and the 25% in the failure to prepare the next generation. But let's walk through this. So the first 3 phases is all about preparing the asset for the family. So in the first 3 phases, what we're discussing is how do we make sure we make the right financial decisions, the proper trusts, the proper tax planning, the proper investment selection, the insurance selection. How do we make all the right planning decisions technically? And I call that phase 1, 2, and 3, which is prepare the asset for the family. Phase 3 is where we talk about the integration, the coordination, and the collaboration. For many of you on the call, I see the list of people. A lot of you are attorneys that are on the call, some wealth managers, a few accountants. But for us advisors that are working on some of the more complex, sophisticated planning, a lot of that stuff that we're doing is getting done here. But as clients continue from phase 1 to 2 to 3 and ultimately to phase 4 that we call love planning, their confidence increases. Now, phase 4 is where all of the issues that we spoke about before, breakdown in communication and trust, failure to prepare the next generation, all of those issues happen in phase 4. They get addressed in phase 4. They're happening throughout all of the process, but they get addressed in phase 4. So we're going to kind of jump into it deeper. Raise your hand if you have questions. I definitely would love to address your specific questions if you have them. So let's look into breakdown in communication and trust. Many of you may know this, but if not, it's a statistic that will be very helpful. You and I and our clients on average have somewhere between 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because when we're working with families, we're managing all of those thoughts that are in their mind. We as advisors have to deal with all the negative stuff, the problems and issues that they bring into the table. Because when the clients that we're working with, when they come to this table, they're bringing all of their baggage with them, and then us as advisors have to work through that. So the first thing is to realize that they have 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts per day. Now this is the crazy part. 80% of them are negative on average. And 95% of them are repetitive, meaning the same negative thought replays itself consistently. So if you look at the statistics, right, 70% of the wealth doesn't get to the second generation, 90 to the third, 97 to the fourth. We as advisors are dealing with, guys, breakdown in communication and trust. We're dealing with breakdown in communication and trust because from a legacy standpoint, if we can't help and coach our families that we serve to deal with some of these issues that we're going to talk about today, then their legacies, we can have the best technical stuff. Listen, part of our practice on our wealth and legacy group side is all around the technical. It's a whole part of it, tax efficient strategies. But that's not the reason why statistically families' wealth is not making it across the generations. And we're dealing with issues, a lot of thoughts, many of them negative. And if they're negative, and if they're many negative thoughts, then we're having repetitive thoughts. So let's unpack this. So we have two types. We have a conscious mind and we have a subconscious mind. So I'm going to come back to the conscious mind. So almost look at the conscious mind as the exterior part and the subconscious like that, right? So when we're working with clients, we have their conscious mind dealing with their subconscious mind. Now, some of you on here may have some degree in psychology, and you probably could teach this better than I can, but I'm sharing it from a very informative perspective for us as advisors to realize that most of our clients that we're dealing with, they're coming from their subconscious mind. It's the subconscious that's speaking. But we as advisors are addressing the conscious mind. So what is the conscious mind? The frontal lobe, problem solving, creative thinking, personality, memory, the temporal lobe, brainstem, the cerebellum. So all of these different areas of the brain and of the mind. But what's happening with our clients is underneath. It's in their subconscious. So I don't know about you, but I know about me, the families that we work with, when they're having issues with their family members, when husband and wives are not able to communicate well, when they're fighting amongst family and business interests, guys, that's not a conscious. They're dealing with some of the conscious, but it's the subconscious that's replying. That's replying to all of those reactions, and we're going to go through that today. Because today I wanted to build off of how do we help build communication and trust if we know that 60% of the reason why wealth transfer doesn't occur is because of breakdown of communication and trust. Then let's understand some of the rationale that's behind it. So when we look at our mood, our client's moods, you ever say, well, let's make sure we get to that client when they're in the right mood? Well, that's their subconscious mind being able to respond. Or when we look at their emotions, fear and anxiety. Fear and anxiety is happening here, and it's literally making the decision on the conscious mind. So the fear and anxiety happens, and then all of a sudden these things change. It's the reason why when we're serving families, we want to look, when we're working with families, we want to look at how that family is operating. And more importantly, guys, it's something that I've done in my practice for years now. I want to connect with the people through their eyes. And I want to look at their facial expression, because their facial expression will tell me what they're really going through. Because their mouth may say one thing, but their body language and their facial expression says another, because it's very difficult for someone on a subconscious level to control their facial expression. So we're going to jump into the next part. So what is the rational side of it? So the rational side of it is the conscious mind right here. It's the self-control, it's the problem solving, it's the creative thinking. But all of the emotional stuff, and I don't know about you, but I've been working with families for many years now. Even though I look very young, I've been doing this 18 years. And most of the issues that I come against, and I'm sure Dan can probably attest to this as well, Dan Scott, is a lot of the decisions that these families are struggling to make around financial decisions is because we're speaking to the rational, but they're justifying it with the emotional. And what happens is that when they get to a point where fear, because of anxiety or because of things that have happened with the family dynamic issues, that prefrontal cortex shuts off. It literally shuts off right here.
Hey,
And
Chad,
what
if
happened, yeah, go ahead.
I can just jump in there for 1 second. I mean, the other thing that we're facing there is just sort of, you know, culturally, and this is part of the reason that we have this legacy project going on. Culturally, we're trained to see financial assets and money, right, as a goal.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the discussion we need to kind of correct, right? Because really, financial assets are just a tool to achieve goals.
Correct.
And so that's, I think part of that is you're 100% correct in terms of what it's tapping into in the brain, but also our perception of money is one that culturally is, it is an end goal that is a status symbol, a pillar of success, all of these different things.
And
And
Dan, to your point, that's what's happening in the subconscious, right? So as advisors, if we're only addressing conscious issues, we're never getting to the subconscious. You may want to add to this. I was working with a family, right? And a very successful family in the hospitality industry. And we were having conversations, and I needed that, I wanted them to do some more advanced planning because they had some great opportunities to shift some wealth. But we weren't able to get through the subconscious issues. So
right,
consciously it made sense, let's shift assets, let's create these different types of entities and structures, let's get valuation discounts, let's do some really creative stuff. But to get to that point, we had to deal with subconscious issues and we couldn't get beyond that. And I think
right,
as an advisor, when we're helping clients with their legacy, that's the stuff you and I and the people on this call are really struggling with.
yeah, yeah, no, for sure. The other way that we sometimes couch it is, again, money is it being a tool. It's sort of the how, right? Like, or a potential part of the how, right? Your legacy, your purpose is why, right? It's why
Yep.
you are. And then there's the question of what will you do to embody that purpose? What will you create? And then financial assets, money, is really just a potential asset, a resource as to how you're going to get to creating what it is that you want to create or accomplish in order to embody that why, right? Represent that why. And I just think that's a big part of the understanding is our approach to money in general.
Yeah. And Dan, to your point, when we're working with clients, if we're going to get to that conversation that you're talking about, which is the why, right? Simon Sinek talks about that all the time. He says, start with why, right?
Yep.
If we're going to get to the why, the purpose of the money, then we got to help clients get in a position where they're ready to share. And many of you on this call probably know this, but when conflict enters or something's very difficult and uncomfortable and we're trying to get them out of their comfort zone, the body releases a chemical known as epinephrine. It goes into the bloodstream and it makes it much more difficult for people to communicate. So I always say this, my wife and I have a leadership and a business coaching company outside of our generational planning firm. And I say this to the business owners. I say, when people say they're not hearing you, they really mean it, because there was a chemical that was released. And part of our job is, when we're working with the family, is to create an environment. If we're going to help them with their legacy, create an environment where they're going to feel comfortable to share. What does that mean? That means we got to get to know them a little bit better. That means we got to really dive deeper in to who they are and prepare before they come in, if we're going to get to those deeper conversations, because those deeper conversations doesn't happen when the frontal lobe is turned off. It only happens when the frontal lobe is turned on and they're able to really be able to really digest and be able to have these conversations deeper. And these are not normal conversations. Many of you that are on here that do work in the legacy space, that to get to that point, it all has to do with trust. But it's the same thing with families. If we can't help families build trust, then they're never going to be able to get to that deeper purpose and the deeper whys. So I want to I want to start. I want to have another conversation here, and I'm gonna move to the next slide. But as an advisor, I want you to look at the next slide. We're gonna keep it on for 60 seconds, and I want you on the piece of paper in front of you just to jot down anything that comes to mind as you're looking at that picture. Okay? So just jot it down. We're gonna put the picture up for 60 seconds. Okay? And I'm just gonna stay quiet for 60. Go. Just jot down what you're looking at, what you see, what you observe. Gonna give another 20 seconds or so, and then we'll jump in. And I would love for anyone who wants to share what they've observed, just to open up your mic. Just raise your hand, because I think it would be really valuable to other people to hear what you observed. So if you just want to raise your hand and we'll open up your mic, I'd love to you to tell me what, share with the group what you observed in this picture. And Danielle, if you can manage it, I see a couple of people's hands were raised, but if you can open up their mic so they can share what their observation was.
Yes. Richard, we're gonna unmute you. Speak when you can.
Hey, Richard, how are you?
You should hear it on your end. You may have to unmute it on your end.
Yeah. All right. I looked at that picture, Chad, and I thought that's a controlling, closed-minded person.
Okay, I appreciate you sharing that. Anything else that when you looked at that picture came up?
It was a judgmental look.
Gotcha.
Okay. Saying that I really don't want to hear what you have to say, but I'm here.
Yeah.
What's in it for me? I don't feel very willing to share my feelings or my views to that person just on the initial first glance.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. I think this will be really helpful for others that are on the call as well. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. I felt the same way. We have John here. John, I'm gonna unmute you.
Hey, John.
When you can.
Hey, John, you there?
He may be self-muted. He did mention in here though, I'll share it. He said very similar. He said skeptical, wondering what's next, not sure what you're saying, not sure I'm in the right place.
Yep, that's good. Anyone else? Thank you, John. Anyone else want to share? All right. So Danielle, if anyone else does raise their hand, just jump in.
I wonder what. Yeah, I was going to say I wonder what Dan thinks.
Dan, Scott, you there?
I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Yep.
I'm having a connection issue, so let me pull up the slide that you sent me separately. Hold on one second. My reaction, the first word that came to my mind was either bored or boring.
Gotcha. Yeah. So.
And then there's, I don't know if it was the outfit, but I thought secondary it was sort of like a judge. It looked like a judge's robe.
Yeah. Mine was when I first saw this one, I was like Judge Judy, And then I kind of went through all these different thoughts. But
Well, the
I
other
want to go
the
ahead.
judgment too, right? A judgmental look, so it's kind of consistent.
Yeah. All right. So now I want to go to the next part. You ready? And this is the key, guys, because remember what we were talking about when we're talking about legacy. Legacy, for a legacy to really happen, we need communication and trust. That's a big key. And we need to prepare the next generation. Those are the two main ones to really have a true legacy plan, right? Now there's other aspects of it, but those are what studies consistently tell us. Now, this happens, you see how we're observing this right now? This happens within the family dynamic and the family structure. And what happens is what a judgment looks like, and now this is what judgments look like in families. You should have done this, you ought to have done that, you must do this. It stops the dialogue, it decreases affirmation, it increases conflict and shame, and it's subjective, which is decreases trust. So judgments break down communication. Now, observations increase communication, are truthful, and they're objective, and they increase trust. So I'm going to come back to this picture for a moment. So the difference between a judgment now and an observation is this would be an observation, and this is the things that we work with in part of our practice with the families, because we want them to be really dealing with observations, because the judgments hurt the communication, it hurts the trust. The observation is she has a black robe. She's sitting in a chair, a wooden chair. There's a green seat. There's books behind her. She has a neck piece. She's wearing glasses. She has a watch on. Those are observations. The judgments is all of the things that we associate with what we're looking at. And unfortunately, when we're working with families, and a lot of that issues around planning and trust, if they're dealing with the judgment side of it, and they're not dealing with the observation side of it, it just makes it that much harder for that family to have success across generations. So one of the things we always talk about is this. Let's talk about observations. The judgments may be accurate, but they may not be. And if we're making judgments and they're not accurate, they may have long-term consequences to our family's harmony. So I want to give you a little bit of a couple of things to take away. And at like I said, guys, just jump in. If you have questions, I'm gonna open it up for some questions at the end. So you could raise your hand if you have questions, and I'll open it up. But the purpose of this is, and Dan and I are gonna have a discussion at the end of this too. But the purpose of this is to really get your feedback, because I think there's a lot of value in what you guys bring to the table of what you're seeing in your world and your community and your clients. But building trust, ha. This is so key, ha. Honest, authentic, humble, and accepting. This is a little thing that you could take away when you're working with families. If you really want to help them with their legacy, I'm going to come back to the very beginning. Hold on one sec. See here? We talk about this part, prepare the family for the asset. Part of preparing the family for the asset is this right here, helping them to be honest in their communication, authentic, helping them be humble, and accepting and non-judgmental. You see, real trust opens up communication. I say this all the time with families. I say this all the time with businesses and the owners of businesses. I say, when communication breaks down and it occurs for extended periods of time, eventually trust breaks down. Trust doesn't break down first. Communication breaks down first. And then eventually it makes it into, I can't trust that person. And a lot of the families that we're working with, they're trying to transfer wealth and they're creating all these phenomenal structures. But if they're not dealing with the other side of that wealth, they're only really addressing a small piece of it. So trust opens up communication. Trust helps people to believe in themselves and to take the risks. And trust motivates people to invest in those relationships. But when you don't have trust, you don't openly communicate. You don't believe and take risks. You don't invest in people. You're manipulative, not honest. You're proudful, not humble. And I'm going to come back to here. You ready? This ego barrier, you guys have seen this. This ego barrier, I call it edging greatness out barriers. What are those barriers? Breakdown in communication, breakdown in trust, pride, arrogance. I know better. That stops families from having what they could have. And our job, I believe, if we're going to be helping them design and intentionally live and leave a legacy, we need to address these issues, guys. The financial industry, the wealth managers, the attorneys, the CPAs, we're not taught this. The life insurance advisors, we're not taught this stuff. We're taught go out and sell, and that helps them. But studies don't and statistics don't show that. So work with someone that has the ability to address these issues. Because the families that you and I are working with, whether they have a little or whether they're billionaires, they're dealing with these issues. I know it. I used to work with the average person. That was our market. The average person for the beginning of my career. And then over the last 10 years, we moved over to the high net worth and then the ultra high net worth. But you want to know the same consistent theme that I heard, regardless of who and the market I was in? They don't understand me. They just don't get me. They'll find out when I'm dead. Whether the guy's worth or the woman's worth $1 billion or whether they're worth $150,000. Those are the things that they're saying because they're saying people don't understand them. So the advisors that understand their clients are going to be able to help them more intentionally develop and build and intentionally lead and live their legacy. So I'm going to come back to here. Dan, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement, and I do think it's important to understand the commonality in terms of what sort of everyone feels or thinks. 100%.
No, and I'm not saying that we need to be therapists. I'm not saying that we need to be these professional coaches. What I am saying is just realize that this is what our families are dealing with. They're coming up against this, you know. In the beginning, I didn't even have the skill set to help them with this. All I knew was the problem. So I was trying to find out what are ways to help them with this. And I would find books and I would give them videos. Eventually, we developed a company to be able to address these issues. But these are the things that they're going through. They're struggling through these things. And I'm
Chad,
seeing it.
I always really sort of simplify, when I talk to clients, to kind of find that lowest common denominator. For me, I always reflect on, we talk about generational wealth, and maybe this is a bit of a tangent, so stop me, but, the idea of what do parents really want for their kids, right? When we're doing planning, right, in traditional estate planning versus legacy planning, what is really the goal behind this? And I think, most parents will come up with a very similar answer, which is where, I want my children to be happy, to have the chance to, pursue their dreams and live a fulfilled life, something to that effect, which I kind of boiled down to the idea of, happiness and human fulfillment. And I think, that's a fundamental, I think, shared emotion, right? And it sounds lofty, but I think at some point, like, happiness is really what we're striving for. Human fulfillment is really what we're striving for. And we get lost when we get lost in the conversations around financial assets and things, and the reality is, again, and this is where legacy comes in. But financial assets are a tool, perhaps, to achieve that goal. And one of the reasons that I've really focused on legacy is, to me, legacy, particularly as you define it forward-looking, right? It's defining your life purpose. And I think I've mentioned this on prior calls. I'm sort of a big student of the positive psychology movement, and the Abraham Maslow and sort of self-actualization and things like that. Where what's cool about today is there's studies around happiness, and the biggest conclusion that I have drawn from everything that I have read is that purpose and being purposeful is fundamental to happiness. And so, to me, that comes back to legacy planning, in the sense that what you're really trying to do is create purpose, define purpose, because that is going to do two things, right? Most importantly, it's going to lead to that sense of happiness and human fulfillment. And then secondarily, I think that when you put purpose and direction behind financial assets, it actually solves the problem of those financial assets being squandered over multiple generations, because you're giving it direction, because you're putting barriers, guardrails around those assets, so that they can't be fought over, litigated against, and all those other things. And because they're traditional estate plans lack that purpose and direction, that's a big reason why the financial assets are squandered.
Yeah. Again, I'd like to interject on that for a moment. So, and kind of what I see, right, when it comes to, a lot of this legacy planning and estate planning and stuff, is I see some people, advisors that do it really well, kind of similar to like what you talk about and what you do when it comes to creating structures that help support the fulfillment of their purpose, and how do they live and leave their legacy, right? But I think there's an element that right before that, right, is why, and this is the question, and I would propose it to probably everyone on this call, is why do families not get to those deeper conversations? That's a question that I think we should all answer. Like, why do these families not get to these deeper conversations? Because if we can answer that question, I have some ideas around it. I don't know if I have the answer, but I definitely have some thoughts around that. If we answer that, then those conversations become more natural and they become more often.
Well, I would love your thoughts, because where I come at, I sort of blame, again, sort of culturally, we're not taught to think that way, right? We're not taught to think about living a life of purpose. We're taught to get a job, to make money, to pay for stuff. We're not taught to have these sort of conversations, which, and this, I'll come up against this often, and maybe you'll see it generationally. I hate to generalize, but an older generation tends to not necessarily understand some of what we're talking about from a legacy and purpose perspective. They seem to think it's impractical and lofty, right? Aspirational, and not grounded, in how they see things, which is tangible, which is asset driven, asset from the traditional financial asset, concrete asset, which comes back to, opens up the door to the other conversation around, well, what are assets and what is wealth, right? It's not just financial wealth, there's human wealth and other forms of wealth. And so this, again, why do they not have that conversations? Because we don't tell them to. Because as an industry, we focus on financial assets. Because as an industry, as a culture, we value financial assets as the end goal. And that's, for me, that's the purpose of this call. That's the purpose of this organization, is to create a shift, a fundamental shift away from caring, quite frankly, about financial assets. Because we know, and again, this goes back to the studies around happiness. They have proven the old adage that money doesn't buy happiness. And what are we here for? Why are we on, why do we work with clients? Do we work with clients to make them money, or do we work with clients to make them happy? I think, again, it sounds almost silly to say. It sounds almost childish to say, but it's the truth. We're here to help our clients be happy. Otherwise,
So,
what the hell are we doing, right? I
so
mean,
Dan, I want to speak to that.
yeah,
I agree with you, and I'm in agreement that our clients, the goal is to help them fulfill their purpose, whatever that is, right? Now, everyone's purpose is different, and everyone's reasoning for why they do it is different, right? But I want to go back to your specific question, which was I would love to get your thoughts on why this is occurring, and this is my thought as a student of human interaction. We live in a culture that if we don't agree with someone, we then shut down their thought process. What happens when we do that? And it happens all the time. I've seen it with mom and dad and children. Children don't buy into mom and dad shut them down, and then all of a sudden the children no longer want to share. Or I've seen it where children are sharing with mom and dad shut down, and now children don't want to share. That's breakdown in communication. So part of what we're seeing, and we're seeing this, I mean, listen, I'm not going to turn this into a political conversation, but we are seeing this across more than I've ever seen in the history of our nation. We're seeing it across political parties, regardless of whether you're the left or right, the up, the down, it doesn't matter. People are having a difficult time learning how to communicate and agreeing to disagree. So,
well, yeah, I want to highlight that point. I want to emphasize you brought that into the kind of the current political environment. I think I want to highlight that while the issue of sort of not listening or accepting other people has been magnified by the current situation, it's by no means been unique to the current situation. That for generations, for centuries,
it's the
this has been
human condition. It's the
so
human
it
condition.
comes in waves in terms of the degree, but by and large, what you're talking about is helping people, sort of, accept those differences, accept that, and again, I'll bring it back to happiness. What makes you happy doesn't necessarily make me happy. What you find personally fulfilling doesn't necessarily make, me personally fulfilled, and that's okay.
And Dan,
right? That's okay. Like, people are different. And that's, in my view, part of the beauty of humanity, right? And it goes
that's
back
the observation part. You see,
what's that?
I said that's the observation part that's on the screen right now. So the advisors that are listening, a lot of the times these families are giving judgments. This is how it should be. If you don't agree with me, then you're wrong, rather than helping facilitate a more open conversation of, tell me why you feel that way. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
And if we're and this is, listen, I'm just being totally blunt here. That's the industry. I've been working with accounting firms. I've been working with law firms and wealth management teams, and less than 5% of the advisors that I work with, I would say, are good communicators. So if the advisors are not good communicators and the families are struggling with communicating, how the heck is that family going to have a chance at really seeing generational wealth and building a legacy and leaving a legacy?
Well, let me jump in there too, Chad, because you mentioned earlier, there's sort of the concept, which I think, again, in terms of a course correction, we talk about technical expertise.
Yep.
Right? And we tend to use that term when it comes to, like, chapter and verse and taxes and all that stuff. We consider that technical. I think communication skills is a technical skill that we need. I think I think what we have labeled, and it's a label that carries a judgment. What we have called the softer issues, around planning,
harder issues,
are the actual harder issues, and they are technical issues, is my point. These are technical attributes and skills required to actually be planning. And not for nothing. I mean, not to insult anyone who's a hardcore tax person, but numbers, let's face it, computers do it. right? At some point, and this goes back to the preservation of our industries. At some point, what we currently consider technical work is going to be obsolete because
100%.
computers will do it. That's on the investment side. That's the investments, right? It's all going to be algorithms, right? So in actual getting a return, that technical skill is not going to be your job. On the legal side, in terms of how to actually mitigate estate taxes and crunch those numbers, eventually it's all those are questions that can be answered by computers. What we cannot, at least to my knowledge, get a computer to really do is serve the human advisor role, to bring the understanding of the human experience to the relationship. I don't think we can quite teach a computer to be human in that sense. And that is critical. And to me, that is technical. To be able to speak to a client, relate to a client, advise a client based on their best needs, based on their best, their goals, not just numbers. That's a technical skill that we need to start thinking about. Because otherwise, everyone's going to be out of a job.
And Dan,
in
there's a
addition
whole
to
scientific aspect of this. There's a whole scientific aspect of this, and I want to come to that point because I think as we're kind of coming to the tail end of today's conversation, I want to come to this part. I shared this last month. So one of the best ways to help facilitate communication. So hear me out. It's a tool that we utilize at our company, at our leadership coaching company, our leadership assessment, and it looks at mission, competency, and style. So hear me out. This is where families I've seen struggle. So you take a family that's trying to continue to develop and intentionally build and leave their legacy, right? What motivates each family member? What do they value? Competencies, what are they good at? What's their aptitude, style? How do they behave? How do they express themselves? So one of the things that we've done is when we're working with families, and I do it intentionally because I'm not a therapist. It's not, and nothing wrong with that industry. I think that's a valuable industry. But I don't have that background. So I need to utilize science and technology to be able to help me serve families to address that issue. Those two major issues: breakdown of communication and trust, and failure to prepare the next generation. Well, how can we prepare the next generation if we don't know what the next generation values? And this is a tool. You can look at and see, okay, what do they value? Where are they passionate? What's their mission? Where are they competent? So if this is a family member, I can look at the family member and say, okay, this family member really has a value, really has a passion to help people.
Yeah.
This family member is really good at looking at data. This family member is really good at making things run effectively. Now,
Chad, that's an important distinction, again, I think, to highlight the difference between, what I'll call traditional estate planning and legacy planning.
Yeah.
In estate, assets, your assets, financial assets, are absolutely something that you can give and really force on even the next generation. When you talk about legacy and you talk about purpose, your purpose, your legacy, your individual, what makes you tick, and your contribution to the world is not necessarily, in fact, most often isn't something you can force onto the next generation. And that's a critical planning distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, when I approach legacy planning, what I want to really do is define that individual purpose and legacy, protect it, make sure that it continues to provide its value and service to the world, while serving as a springboard, if you would, for the next generation to find and fulfill their own. So Dan, from a planning perspective, it's a real the idea of taking assets, financial assets, tangible assets, and giving them to the next generation, as opposed to embodying purpose into those assets and planning with those assets to preserve them while having them benefit and propel forward the next generation.
Yep. Well, think about this. You ready? Let's say you have a family, a financially successful family that is building a family foundation, and they're looking at saying, okay, who's the person that's really going to lead the charge here? Well, we want to make sure that the person who's leading the charge is very high in mission and competency and societal change, because that's going to get them super excited. Now, if you take this person and you put them in that role, they may not get excited.
Yeah.
So what I'm
talking about there, like, is another distinction to make. There, with a foundation like that, what you're talking about is where there is a family legacy, and that's not everybody wants that, right? So we and this is how I think the term is largely perceived. The word legacy to me in our industries right now is perceived in two ways. One is some people still use it to just mean a financial legacy. That's just totally wrong. The other is to think about it in terms of purely family legacy, right? Rockefeller's dynastic type wealth associated with a family. That sort of pooled identity is an option that some like, right? Some value that family legacy aspect. Others don't. But that's, again, separate and independent from each individual member's legacy.
I don't know if I 100% agree with that, and I'll tell you why. I think that they are interdependent upon each other. So I'll give you an example. So a individual legacy and a family legacy are kind of interdependent, meaning, so you take a successful family. Let's just use the Rockefellers because you mentioned that name, right? So
I'm going to agree with you, but that's only to the extent
let me finish.
Value family legacy.
Well, let me finish my point, and then we can kind of continue, right? So you take the family legacy, the Rockefellers, but then you have individual legacies that tie into a family legacy. So a case in point, let's say you have John D. Rockefeller's grandson, right? Well, his grandson may be developing his own legacy, but within the family legacy, he could tap into the financial assets, because there's 5 types of assets. And you and I talk about this: financial capital, intellectual capital, social capital, human capital, and spiritual capital. So part of having a individual legacy could also mean tapping into a family legacy. But I think, to your point, and I think this is kind of what you kind of allude to a lot, is that the industry in general really just buckets it as a family legacy rather than the interdependency of a family legacy and an individual legacy that sometimes match and meet and become something bigger, but they're 2 separate things. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, yeah. Look, I'll just take myself, right? So Dan Scott is the founder of Spotlight Advisory Group, co-founder of Spotlight Advisory Group. It's part of my personal legacy, right? And that's an asset that will embody those values and be carried on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can decide that I want, being a Scott or the Scott family, to sort of stand for something, in which case I will create another pool of assets that are what I would call family legacy assets, right? Intended to identify and preserve those shared core values, which will evolve and change over time. I could also be of the opinion that that's just all BS. And the reality is, aside from Spotlight, which I want to be my individual legacy, I just want to give my kids everything else and let them do their own thing. They're all just, so my point is that's a fundamental perspective that we almost take for granted, the idea of family legacy. Not everybody, particularly in today's modern times where families are so, and for lack of a better word, broken, right? Not everyone wants a family legacy today or understands or values that concept as they did once upon a time.
Agree. And I think the key is
that the things where if I decided to build the Scott family legacy, if that meant something to me, then you're 100% right that each individual legacy is intertwined and interdependent on that broader legacy. But I could also decide that really that there is no central identity, that there is no, right?
100%.
That's all.
Yep. Yeah. There's no central you know, for a lack of a better word, a holding company for the family's identity, right? But
yeah,
but
hey, my kids can disagree, and so when I'm gone, they can decide, hey, we should have like a family legacy, and they can create their own thing that does that. But that's a value that I just don't want to. I don't want to project onto anyone, particularly in today's time. I think that's become a value that is less prioritized.
Yep. And I'll say this: I think that in wrapping, and if anyone has any questions, raise your hand or type in your question because we're kind of coming to the end. But I will say this: it all begins with a conversation. So when I see families and when I see individuals that are doing it well, they're able to have productive conversations. And when I see ones that aren't, they're not able to have productive conversations. So all of this, I believe, begins with a conversation around what do we have, what do we want to accomplish, what do we want our legacy to be, how do we want to live that legacy. And our friend and mentor John Maxwell says this all the time. He says that there's a difference between intentionally good and good intentions, and I think a lot of families, they have good intentions. I want to have this, I would like to do this, I want to build this legacy. But there's a big difference when action meets good intention. And I think the main thing to get to that point is having open conversations that help facilitate communication, because nothing happens, none of this planning, none of the fruition of that legacy happens without a true, honest, deep, authentic conversation. And I just want to encourage the advisors that are on here today, have those conversations with your clients, or at least facilitate some of those conversations. So in wrapping, I don't see any questions. Danielle, is there any hands raised?
No, not at this time, no.
Great. So in wrapping, guys, it was great to spend time with you. I think we're about an hour in, and on the screen, we put dates for the upcoming year. So you could put them in your calendar. On some of those, I may be leading them. On some of them, Dan may be leading them. On some of them, we both may be leading them. Some months we have outside speakers to come in. So those are the dates, though, for the year. All of the conversations are going to be around this legacy conversation. But I do want to encourage you, go on our website, go on our YouTube page, go back to, I'm going to bring the YouTube page up here. Go back to previous conversations. Where are we? Right there. Go back to previous conversations. We had a conversation that spearheaded this whole movement with John Maxwell, one of the top leadership coaches in the world, about leading clients through crisis. Go back and listen to it. Bring some advisors around the table. But I want to thank you. Danielle, is there any questions before we hop off?
No, we are good.
All right. So, like I said, these are the upcoming dates. That's Dan and I, but the upcoming dates are right here. And we just honored for that you spent the past hour with us. I hope that there was value in it. Like I always say, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to send us an email, a text, an email, or comment on any of these YouTube videos, or share them. But our goal is to make these conversations more common so that families can be more positively impacted. So I thank you guys. God bless you guys. Hope you have a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holiday, and we will see you in the upcoming New Year. All right. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.